Now we're getting into gravity and movement. Gravity and movement is what I'm after. I'm a movement specialist. I study movement. People that can't move well also can't manipulate gravity well. Their organization of their system is now succumbing to gravity versus opposing gravity. And we're going to get into that. I know we covered this briefly in the last lecture, but I really just have to stress this enough. Again, the initiation of all functional infant developmental movement patterns has to come in opposing gravity and has to be organized with rotational movements. That's just that's the basic sciences with all of that, and it needs to be. So when you're in outer space or you're in a lot of therapies, you're attached to equipment, which is now a mass-based function, right, versus an oppositional-based function. And these really have to be evaluated more. Living in exercise equipment, again, is bulky, outdated, expensive. I can go on and on and on. But it continues to create health-related failures, right? I get it that it's a measurable outcome. That doesn't mean it's an outcome that should happen. If I drink alcohol, right, and I have a glass of wine, I will have a measurable outcome as to my demise. To me, this is the same thing. Even though you're seeing an impressive amount and people feel, oh, if I have a drink, I'm more confident, I can do more things, you can't, right? It's a different psychosis because why? Alcohol takes away your rotation, right? And really, Peggy Whitman, I have not seen her since she's come back, right? But really, I really wanted to, again, because they just can't move. They're in beanbags, right? The succumbing to gravity, that force of gravity is so much greater, even though, again, they have that cognitive thing. And Colonel Chris Hatfield really said it right. Right after a lander, I could feel the weight of my lips and tongue, and I had to change how I was talking. I hadn't realized I learned to talk with a weightless tongue. And again, this is what I deal with when someone comes to me and says their baby can't swallow, or they have tongue issues. Tied tongue is a big thing right now because, again, there's so much car seat use. I love this picture, right? We really need to stress our outcome, again, whether I'm not going to space, right? But that doesn't mean I can't be included in all this, right? And the fact that they have to be at such a fitness grade to become an astronaut when I might be the most qualified person, but right now under NASA standards that I would be deemed, unapproachable. Movements in space. Every day a body stands, rises, and sits in opposition to gravity, right? Unless you're in a nursing home. And all of these kind of things, even for me to jump, right? I'm capable of it. I didn't have to think about it. I can mimic movements based off of, I can oppose gravity with circular rotational movements, right? But it doesn't happen in the space station. A human propulsion system, the simple act of coming to standing, the body is formatting movements through 14.7 points of gravitational PSI, right? Escape velocity is way more common than you think, and to understand that, how we move, whether it's reaching for that cup, right, or coming to standing. And it creates our cognitive formatting. I can't stress enough, when a baby's born, they're like, Mom, there's a cold one in the fridge, let's go. Language, manipulation of cognitive thoughts, they don't come till after most of your milestones are met, right? And so when a child has issues with delayed milestones or that inability to create, then they have cognitive issues, right? You're not going to have very rarely a very high IQ child that's special needs because of what I'm showing you here. This is what the brain needs to do, the format. Now, again, the brain can be damaged, and people assume that this is the conversations that can't happen, right? But that's where we have to come into play, and that's what I do here at Movement Lesson. Human development. The mind of a child starts to produce momentum and force to these gravitational responses and stimuli around them, which stimulates their cognitive and functional development within the opposition to gravity. So the organizations of how I move is how I am as a human being, right? Whether it's reaching for that cup, or if I were to draw here, or something like that, or to drive my car, all of these cognitive synapses, even solving a mathematical problem, are going to come down to, was I able to format this from the beginning of my life, right? And that's where my aha came in, that I need to show you ways of movement and manipulation that you just didn't know were possible. Expansion mode, the woman's low gravity environment due to amniotic fluid, low and non-organ functions. Expansion mode, what does that mean? The baby has to grow again in a frictionless environment, right? So the body can expand in all directions, whether it's the face, look at that, right? Look at the skeletal system. All of this has to expand in all directions, right? So a frictionless environment, what does that mean? Well, yes, there's gravity in place, but gravity is a lot different in the womb because there's no elimination. I'm not breathing, I'm not eating, and I'm not eliminating. And even breathing is elimination patterning. And so I don't have that. Right? Then we're coming into this is the first introduction to rotation, a natural delivery. The back of the head, the occiput hits the mom's pubic bone and then spins out. Right? It's the first rotational movements, but then all your developmental movement patterns are not considered long-term health factors in space. Why? I don't crawl anymore. I'm a grown human being, but I'm capable of crawling, and the movements of crawling have come into play, right? So the fact that you've just lost all your developmental movement patterns the second you hit atmosphere out or leave atmosphere, you can't just do these simple tasks and nobody said, oh, I think there's something to that. You're going to learn that in the course. This is what's really important. Developmental milestones, yes, are anywhere up to your spinning milestone. Now, from 2.5 to 5 years of age, you go into a spinning milestones. A child that's just on the chair and spinning out, going over the couch, going into your cartwheels, your spinning, your bicycles, your somersaults. Now, they're not happening as much as they should be, thanks to using the cell phone, and the kids are becoming much more, and they're not mastering these. I'll tell you right now, if they don't master their spinning milestones, they're not going to master a lot of skills. They're not going to get to the Olympics, and it'd be very hard for them to become PhDs because they're missing that future milestones. But their anatomic human responses are developed, structured, and based upon the opposition of gravity. Whereas developmental delays is a lack or decrease of rotation, neuromapping to succumbing to gravity, not opposing, and decreased peripheral recognition. Meaning that, again, that tunnel-based vision and so forth, not having that peripheral. And you saw that in the last webinar with Mark Kelly eating and so forth, because again, when they're not glued down, you'll see them going around, but it's not peripheral. And that you'll see that with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, where it really comes into play with the decreased cognition. Functional movements all have to be with rotation, and it's fun, right? And that's what we do, because this was what starts getting our momentum. And the spinning milestones, like I said, are really important. Optimal health. Again, the same thing with me. Optimal health. I can do everything I talk about. And I say that proudly, but I say that because I practice what I go into. And the health is different if you looked even on my blood work of what it looks like. And you will see that at 56 years old, I'm not looking like that I'm ready for retirement or an old folks home, and I have the stamina and the movements needed to do a lot more than young kids. Now, this is one of the papers I presented at Oxford, where I talked about the perpetual motion. Now, I know most people think about perpetual motion as being a machine. We are machines, right? And so if you look at the internal structure of the muscle base, now, no offense, in 2017, and with my payload, these are the graphics that we're getting. But if you look at the myosin acins within the muscle structure, the ATP collection, right? You're taught, it's taught in biosciences that that's a sliding filament. I presented that actually it's a rotational filament. And the rotational filament is what you get to go into your rotational skills. So you actually see this where it's starting to spinning, and the oppositional rotational movements. And that's what it takes for all of our movements from the inside out. Now, these are linear-based oppositional rotational movements, and that's what a muscle is. And I'm going to show you right now using my button toy, right? And now that's different than an atomic rotation or a cellular rotation where you have an elliptical orbit going around the nucleus and you're having that oppositional rotation in a circular sphere. So these create different types of movement and momentum, but they still create a perpetual motion. My atoms should not be stopping at the moment, and really my passive and active muscles shouldn't be stopping either. Now here's a close-up too, where you can see the myosin actin doing the ATP collection and the rotational going in to it. Now, this is where I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman, right? And he was an amazing physicist, and he, what he said was, the reason I'm so impressed by him, or one of the reasons, but he talks about, he played with transistor radios, right? And the toys that we played with as kids, you guys aren't getting because everything's on Google, right? Now this is a more modern version of what's called a button toy. So basically you take string and you put your button in. Now I took string and buttons to Oxford, and that's what I was showing people, what a muscle function is. But you can see how the energy of the rotation wants to contract the muscle or pull it in and go out. Now I can be reaching for a cup, right? And then reaching for a cup, or I'm walking. So when I have active and passive muscles, that's where I'm talking about that we have a perpetual motion or a machine that functions within the body, but it has to happen within opposition to gravity. So this muscle and all that I'm doing, and this is just a simple button toy. You can get these on Amazon if you want to play with it. But and people are so excited. They're like, this is a muscle contraction. But this is what's needed, and it's not, when I just showed you the muscles flying off the astronaut's legs, this is not how we're meant to move. This is how we're meant to move. And that's why we have to create the equipment that I want to do in outer space, and that's needed. And these are some of the things I'll be teaching you in the course. So again, you can see that perpetual motion. When my muscles are working with movement, acceleration, and even cognitive manipulation, right? That's where you get that energy from, right? You don't say and go, oh, I want that cup, let me contract the muscle, right? We are using that, the second that rotational movement in opposition to gravity comes in, your button toys will kick in at some level. Now, obviously, I'm just picking up a cup, so I don't need a lot. But if I was suddenly doing a higher weight-based or, again, oppositional thing, my system adjusts to that. And that's where also we're different than escape velocity and just thrust. So again, movement and energy structure is converted, creating constant and often synchronized use of potential and kinetic energy, right? It's controlled reaction and action, right? But that's really, again, not what we do. And we can't do those kind of studies, the controlled studies, in a space-based program, right? Because again, Dr. Scott Penrose is going to respond differently than Mark Kelly to, let's say, a certain movement, right? Not to say one's better than the other, but if you're familiar with Dr. Penrose, he's a very tall man. I've met him at ASU. Where Mark Kelly is a little bit shorter in stature. He's a little bit wider, meaning that, the bulk of his shoulders. And it can go on, just having life experiences, which will be different. But again, showing you the muscle contractions, you can sort of see it here. It's still showing a very linear base, but the corkscrews within, and again, creating that cognitive acceleration, but also to the hydraulics that starts coming into play. And then each set of those hydraulics will do. So that's why your gross motor skills, your gross muscles will respond differently than your fine muscle skills based off of what they need to move mass around. Right? But it's still all done with opposition to gravity. So I still love this going into organic life, right? Which we're going into here, where you're just going to start to see the beans start to grow. It's still that opposition, right? And it's starting to change here, but at the same time, that oppositional rotation is there. You can see the root, and again, it's an immature, but if I were to look from underneath, that root is rotating like this. Right? You'll see the rotations. right? And as they're starting to rotate and they're going out, even these fine hairs, everything has rotation. And now that momentum creates that larger rotation. And now the Earth's rotation, and this is that oppositional rotation. This is life, right? Shedding that, and again, the rotation is never stops. When it does, we are dying or we're succumbing to gravity. Again, it's just the pure science of it all. It's fascinating. Every living organism on Earth functions based on its ability to oppose and move in and around gravitational force. That's it. And then you'll see again where the more mature rotational oppositional movements come into play, right? And especially now that the tendrils will start to come in and they'll start to shoot out, but again, all using rotational abilities. If that plant cannot use rotation, it's not going to produce a fruit. It will not be functional as a plant, right? It won't have functional movements. And it's fascinating, but we don't see this because we're organized to this. The plant's organized to this. So it seems the same. We're just looking at a plant grow. But to see this time lapse, and now you see the momentum start to change. These are what I talked about. From 2.5 to 5 years old, we have spinning milestones. Now you're really starting to see that in the plant and going into. I just can't stress enough what you're going to get out of the course and learning about all of that. Going into that, and again, you're starting to see even more fine-tuned rotational skills just within 23 days of life, right? So plants only have one mission, and that's how they draw the water coming out of it, but it's really important factors. Gravitational binding energy within our cores. So individual planetary and star cores rotation creates a force that we call gravity. So the rotation of each one of our cores in the Earth is going in opposite direction. And again, sort of what's happening with that plant, and then you're seeing that binding force going into very mature rotations, which goes into our system, right? We think we have just this orbit around the sun, elliptical orbit, whereas again you're seeing Earth's rotation going out. So all my life I thought this is how we orbited the sun, was going around in just a smooth orbit, right? But looking out, you can see where the planet Earth actually is a larger rotation, which I'm about to show you with this exercise ball, exercise gyroscope. And then at the same time too now, I actually think this is more like a magnetic coil, and the energy created off the planet's projecting the sun, and it stays together with the bind there. A lot of people believe that the sun is actually pulling the solar system with it as it goes through space. But again, this is all from Vsauce, and it's a really interesting thing of how we really work. So now when I'm using that exercise gyroscope, so my rotation is necessary. So I can't do, again, see, centripetal force, because it'll stop rotating. So just like the Earth, right? And that's what you're seeing here. And my rotation is creating the perpetual motion within this. So if my hand stops or my rotation stops, now again, if I handed this to most of you, you would have a hard time articulating something like this. But that's a very similar mathematics that is used for getting the Earth around. Future studies have to be included with everything that I'm about to show you in this course. You will be getting a hands-on into the future of our medicine and space adaptations, neuromuscular. I can go on and on. You're going to have hands down an avenue, a door into our future that most people don't have besides people like me. Again, having the artificial opposition of gravity, it's practical, but the cost-effective creation and implementation of movement application in outer space, it's just so much more of a factor than having artificial gravity, right? And going into that. I won't be talking about the designs that I'm working on for these, again, cost-effective creations, but that's something that can be worked on if any of you are looking to internship. We have to make life multiplanetary, but it is just our way of our future. We need these stresses to go in. Whether it's going to happen in my lifetime, I don't know. But again, the key to our future as multiplanetary is hidden in You Can't Get to Mars Without Me, and it's a necessary read, but also the study. The human body in space has to go on, but gravity and movement. And I really look forward to you now going into your next chapter of life, into gravity and movement, into the course. And I'll see you there. Thanks.